Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Layer Zero. I am contributor at Powerhouse, and I'm going to talk today about open source legal resources for DAOs, or why DAOs are failing and how open source legal can fix them. First, we start with a very boring disclaimer. We are going to talk about legal topics, but nothing on this presentation is legal advice or financial advice or investment advice. It's only for information purposes, not legal advice. So very important. Okay, as you probably already know, DAOs are very innovative organizational structures, but DAOs in their current state are failing. DAOs are dysfunctional. DAOs have challenges by reaching consensus. DAOs have challenge by executing or coordinating. And why is that? Because they are very novel organizational structures, but they lack operational and legal infrastructure. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of a subset of the challenges that DAOs have, which are legal challenges. The main challenge is that DAOs are not recognized as legal entities, and DAOs do not have formal legal structures. So what does that imply? That DAOs cannot sign legal agreements. DAOs cannot sign legal agreements with contributors, cannot sign agreements with service providers or clients. Another problem is that DAOs cannot hold assets, for example, intellectual property assets. And a very important one is that because of DAOs are not recognized as legal persons, then the DAO members, the contributors, or the governors are potentially exposed to personal liability. That is something very important for all of you that are working in DAOs, that you should have your own structure, legal structure. If you don't structure your interactions with a DAO, the default position is that you are personally liable. There is in this legal world one type of association, it's called the general partnership. If you don't incorporate or do some type of legal structure around it, you are potentially liable not only for your mistakes, but for errors or liabilities or debts from other people in the DAO. So it's very important to take this into account. So some typical problems. Problem number one, hiring contributors or suppliers. For example, you may need to sign contracts, contributor agreements with your contributors. For doing that, you need a legal entity. For example, contributors may need an invoice, a company to send an invoice to. For that, you need a legal entity. You may have contributors that want to be paid in fiat. For that, you need a legal entity. So for procurement and operations, that's one subset of problems that derive from the lack of legal personhood of DAOs. The second set of problems is selling services. What if your DAO has revenues or clients? You may need to sign a contract with your client, a service agreement, a service level agreement, or some type of contract that defines what type of services are you providing. You may need, if you have a front end or a website, you may need to publish some terms and conditions. For that, you need a legal entity. You may need to process payments or convert them into fiat. For that, you also need a legal entity. So this set of problems are related to the revenue and generation or sales function of a DAO. Second subset of problems. Third subset of problems, fundraising. What if you need to raise capital? You may need to engage with in negotiation with VCs. You may need to sign term sheets or SAFTs. You may need, or if you want to do it blockchain-based fundraising, you may need to issue a token. This token would probably be a security token. For that, you need a legal entity. So this subset of problems are related to the fundraising and capital allocation function. Fourth subset of problem, intellectual property, very important. In DAOs and the digital world, we deal with intangible assets, intellectual property, but DAOs cannot hold intellectual property because they are not recognized as legal entities. You may need a legal entity to hold all your intellectual property, your copyrights and your trademarks. You may need to set the license terms and sign license agreements. For that, you need a legal entity. Or what happens if you have open source copyrights and third party are infringing them, or a third party tries to have a claim on yourself. For that, you need a legal entity. This subset of problems are related to IP ownership and licensing. Okay, so we're going to present you our model of scalable network organization. It's a legal model for structuring network organizations. Our approach is that we saw in the previous slides 4 subsets of problems. In the green part was the subset of problems related to the contributors and to the suppliers. That's the green one. On the blue one is the subset of problems related to the client and the revenue generating, the demand side. The red subset of problems is related to intellectual property, and this violet is related to fundraising and capital allocation. These 4 are classified in network functions. Each organization, DAO or traditional corporation, need these functions. Need to manage suppliers, needs to manage demand, needs to manage assets, intellectual property assets, and needs to manage capital allocation. So what we are doing in reality is identifying core functions of any organization and unbundling them and rebundling them in the context of DAOs. And you could see here that each of these subset of functions could relate to activities or functions that traditional companies do. For example, capital allocation is related to the earlier phases of the value chain process, research and development or project development. The procurement part, which is the part that coordinates the suppliers and the contributors, could equivalent to general contractor or project management or operations in a traditional company. Then this part is the last part of the value chain, which is more related to business development, sales, and marketing. So we are developing an approach on how to structure resilient networks. And one possible structure for networks is a hub, this hub and spoke model, where we create one hub and which of these hubs fulfill one function for the organization. And the hub, you know from networks that hubs are points where different nodes have a lot of agglomerate different nodes. All of these are nodes. And what we are creating in reality is a growth model for DAOs, where depending on your role in the specific DAO, you can adhere to one of these hubs. So we have one hub that is coordinate the contributors. That is the first legal primitive that Powerhouse built, which is the operational hub. We have a separate hub that coordinates and aligns the clients, the paying clients. We have a third hub that coordinates all the IP and the licensees, whoever receives license to manage the software. And we have a fourth hub for the investors, for doing capital allocation and fundraising. The idea is that the growth model, that from each of these hubs, you can create new hubs. So we will see that in a minute. It would follow like a tree structure or a fractal structure where hubs can spin off more hubs and more specialized hubs. But the point that I want to do is that what we are thinking of is making resilient design of network structures. And if you see in network theory, one possible evolution of network is start with some unstructured collection of nodes. Then a second step is they agglomerate towards one centralized node, a hub and spoke model. Then this evolves to a multi-hub model, which then evolves to a more complex of different core and periphery and hubs and sub-hubs that agglomerate different types of nodes. And this type of structure, if we evolve to this network structure, it will be more resilient. And that's what we want to achieve. This is a slide that explains the growth model, and you can see it looks like biologically how cells grow and divide. So we're creating legal primitives where you can start from how to incubate your own DAO. If you start with you are 2 or 3 team members, or you are one person and have a project with a DAO, how could you grow towards a decentralized autonomous organization? So you start with, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you can start with a wallet. If you are a team, you can start with a multisig. And the first primitive is called the operational wrapper, which composes of 3 parts. And I will go more into detail in the next slide. It composes from a multisig. The second component is an MPA. I will explain in a bit what that is. It's a multisig participation agreement. That is an agreement that co-signers of a multisig wallet sign to define the roles and the accountabilities and the processes and conflict resolution and other type of limitation of legal liabilities when you manage treasury of a DAO. So we have the multisig and we have a legal wrapper. It's an entity that wraps the operational multisig. It's like, you can imagine like a cell, and this is the membrane of the cell. And then we start adding more components. Each of these components is open source, and it will like a plug in that will get into the cell, into the core of the cell. So we add here things like contributor agreements, governance tokens, Pautis, which is a token model that Powerhouse is developing for measuring the cost, the value of your contribution to open source. And then you have this embryonic cell, which is a bit like a undifferentiated in the very early phases of the project. When the project grow in complexity, it will spin off different hubs, as explained before. If if you have a group of contributors, you may spin off an operational hub that hires contributors, or you may have this IPSPV. SPV stands for Special Purpose Vehicle. So you can have one with different subset of subsidiaries that hold different asset portfolios. You can have the revenue generating hub, that is the revenue side, the commercial entity. For that, you need a specialized entity that signs contracts with paying customers. Or you can have the investor, the fundraising vehicle that issues security tokens or raises capital from VCs or traditional investors. So to summarize, what are the functions of the main functions of these legal primitives regarding revenue generating hub? We have a legal primitive, a legal entity that is consumer facing and that signs SLAs or agreement with clients, pays revenue shares back into the network. That is the main function. The operational coordination, the supplier or the supplier hub, the contributor hub, are legal entities that work and coordinate and structure relationship with contributors. It is capable of receiving grants in crypto, signing contributor agreements, paying cash, and receiving invoices. The IP management entity protects the intellectual property, holds the copyright, and sets license terms, and enforces the copyright, the open source copyright, if third parties infringe them. And at last, we have the investment and fundraising vehicle, which is the one coordinating capital allocation. This is the last slide. That is the first legal primitive. It's called the Operation Hub. It's a coordination hub for DAO contributors. So, as explained before, it is composed, but it has three components. The first is the operation multisig, a very simple, traditional Gnosis multisig, safe multisig. We have a multisig participation agreement, which is an agreement that you attach to the multisig and that is signed by the signers of the multisig wallet. And you can put in clauses that protect you against some legal liabilities, especially internal legal liabilities. You can exclude, for example, that you sue each other, or you can put rules about conflict of interest. You can put procedures. How is the procedure to sign? So that is very important because it defines the roles and it increases the accountability of whoever is managing this treasury. And then we have a legal wrapper and a legal entity. And the first legal entity that we will use is a Swiss association. And Swiss associations are very cool legal entities because they are entirely private instruments. So you don't have to file them. They are not registered in any public registry. They are entirely private instruments. So we can put the multisig and then the agreement and then the legal wrapper, which is a contract that you sign. And you have like a very solid foundation, a very solid primitive. This legal wrapper, with this legal wrapper, what you can do, this entity can receive grants in crypto, for example. This entity can receive invoices from contributors or channel payments to them, for example, to fiat, if contributors require fiat. And it is privacy enhancing. And the coolest thing of this is that we'll build this as open source templates that will be free to use. If you need to customize it, then you can go to legal counsel. But the core of the legal library template will be free and open source, and it will be extensive. We'll be growing with time as we have more suppliers in the system. So our contribution to the open source world and to the DAO world is to offer a series of legal primitives that will be in some point. All of this will be offered as legal primitives, as templates, contract templates, and legal wrapper templates. And the first one is for coordinating and structuring the relationship with contributors. That's what I have for you. Thank you for your attention.